Well, Leanne, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. I'll begin, as we always do, with an acknowledgement of our country. So we acknowledge and pay our respects to elders past and present on all the lands in Australia that our meeting participants presently occupy. We also welcome the lessons we can learn from Indigenous spirituality, connection to the land and creation generally. We begin with as our opening prayer, just with a moment of meditation. So if we can start with a moment of centering, use this just very brief time to focus on your breathing, use a familiar meditation practice, or bring your focus to the great creator spirit, whom I choose to call God. So with God as our centre, we thank God for the gift of breath and welcome the opportunity to explore the mystery of creation and our lives on earth. As you've probably worked out, I've been asked to be the facilitator tonight, and thank you, John, for that opportunity. There will be a panel, it was to be a panel of four, but unfortunately one of our panellists, Robin Hunt, is a very late apology due to illness that arose today in her family. So Robin is a very last minute apology. And I'll introduce our other panellists very shortly. So the format tonight will be a discussion period of about 35 minutes, and our panellists, who are now three, will have longer to answer each question. So I'm just prompting our panellists. You can speak for longer than you might have planned to fill in the gap from Robin, and then 10 to 15 minutes of question and answer. While the panel is discussing the briefing paper, I invite all of our participants to comment or ask questions by using the chat room, not by putting your hand up, but by using the chat room. Robert will be monitoring the feed and will help me with the Q&A session, which will commence at about 5:45. Then we finish with a 3-minute reflection period and a wrap-up. Our Zoom protocols, well, everyone will be muted because John's controlling that to avoid any background noise, and we're using the chat to ask questions, or you might have resources you want to share with people and post those in the comments, because all of that is shared after the session tonight. So if I could introduce our panel, and I'm delighted to welcome our first panellist, Father Dave Pascoe. I haven't seen Dave for a long time, so it's lovely to see you, Dave. Welcome. So Father Dave Pascoe was born and raised in Mitchelton here in Brisbane. After studying hospitality management and working in hospital administration. It's always interesting. I've known Father Dave for a long time. I did not know he trained in hospitality management. Could have put those skills to other uses, Dave, before. And worked in hospital administration. He then entered the seminary at the age of 25. After obtaining a doctorate in systematic theology, Father David has spent much of his priesthood as an academic. He taught in the seminary, St Paul's Theological College and the Australian Catholic University. Ecumenism has formed a significant dimension of his priesthood. Father Dave is passionate about enabling people in his parish to engage as the church in the needs of the world, not just ecumenically, but also preaching the joy of the gospel. At the present moment, Father Dave is the Director of Clergy Life and Ministry for the Archdiocese of Brisbane. So we welcome Father Dave to this group tonight.
Thank you.
Terry, who doesn't have his name up, but has an interesting title there under his face, is a Uniting Church minister and chaplain, working for 25 years in community, school, tourism, aged care, hospital and hospice settings. Terry's passionate and reflective practice in pursuit of embodying presence, compassionate service and deep wisdom without an agenda led to his resignation from the Uniting Church in 2016. He is an active participant and proponent in the interfaith and progressive Christian movement, describing himself as interspiritual. Terry leads the Global Charter for Compassion in Australia and is facilitator of Compassionate Gold Coast. So welcome, Terry. Oh, thanks for changing the name. And our final panellist is well known to everyone, John Scoble. John is the co-founder of St Lucia Spirituality. After a career in human resources, John took the opportunity afforded by retirement to explore his faith more fully. This journey of self-discovery has led John to reevaluate and transcend many of his traditional beliefs, embracing instead the timeless wisdom and cosmic perspective inherent in Christianity. Influenced by luminaries such as St Francis of Assisi, St Teresa of Avila, and Richard Rohr, John's spiritual evolution has been marked by a deepening resonance with the essential truths of his faith and a profound connection to the divine unfolding within and around him. So welcome, John, wearing that hat as a panelist. And if I could go firstly to John, who is also the author of the paper. So I'll get John to introduce the paper, and then I'll ask our panel our first question. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Leanne. And my opening comments will be brief. I think the genesis of this paper was a thirst for discovery and reinterpretation. It required a willingness to accept that long-held beliefs may not reveal truth. It reflects an orientation of questioning beliefs and examining them in the light of developments in the fields of science, human psychology, and theology. The teaching that Jesus died for our sins has troubled me for some time, but other life priorities prevented me from examining it in detail. This paper is the result of finally having done so. While providing some historical background, I've focused on contemporary theology and exposed myself to potential criticism by expounding my personal view of what salvation means. Hopefully, by doing so, I've provided the reader with food for thought and the panel with items for debate. So back to you, Leanne.
Thank you, John. So we have three pre-prepared discussion questions in that the panel have been sent these questions in advance. I have prepared a fourth one, which is a question without notice, which if we have time, I'll go to. So our first question is, has your understanding of salvation changed over your lifetime? If so, how? And Father Dave, could I invite you to lead us off?
Thank you, Leanne. The answer is yes. I'll say some more. I think particularly when I was thinking about this, I don't know that salvation was even an issue for much of my early life. I don't think I sort of even dwelt on a concept of salvation. Church was very much a part of my life. I grew up in a family which was very much orientated to church in a parish. I was the second of four children. Mum and Dad took us to church every Sunday. At times, Mum was the secretary, Dad helped out. So it was central to our life was the church. In so many different forms. Sunday particularly, but Friday devotions, all those sort of things went through that. So I don't know that I actually even thought about salvation. This is just what we did in terms of being Catholic and life. So I was born in 1958, so grew up in the 60s, 70s, and so that was it was a time of change, certainly. Even in my youth, when much was changing, I suppose around youth, I don't know that once again that salvation was a particular spiritual issue, life issue, whatever. I probably started thinking about salvation when I went to the seminary and heard the word and focused on that much more, and was given the opportunity to focus on that. That what did it mean for me at that point? I think throughout that my early life, my right up into my 20s, into my and even the seminary time, but getting into theology, then it was about new things like yes, there was the core to if I wanted to talk about salvation then, It was about Jesus and relationship to Jesus, and learning what that meant, moving from a more strictly devotional to personal relationship. And that happened in high school. I think the Christian Brothers were struggling with what did this mean? The Vatican II and the changes and that sort of thing. So it shifted to relationships, and I think that was much more a focus at seminary as well in my mid and late 20s. In the midst of that, one of the critical issues was, I think, engaging in what was the Brisbane College of Theology at that time. So Anglicans, Uniting Church, and Catholics actually studying together. So I heard much more of what salvation meant across denominations, and that was new. And so there was a focus on cross, resurrection, but an expansion on that as well, as theology was evolving at that time and trying to sort of work into different ways. Probably even more so than when I was given the opportunity to go and actually study and do my doctorate early after ordination, and my focus was ecclesiology. So in some ways, my focus has always been church and theologically and spiritually to some degree. So it was about community and a broader sense than simply me, and particularly in my theological sort of work, then as John has presented in his paper, the expansion of that into all sorts of different dimensions of what it is to be human, what it is to be human together, the relationship between the human and the divine. So in the yes, it's still ongoing in some ways, like what salvation actually mean for me today, 36 years ordained. I'm no longer a parish priest. I care for clergy from ordination to death. I'm still working on it. And as John sort of pointed out in the paper, I think, and this is it, we've moved, as John points out, from a particular focus on or a theological focus to a broadening of that as to particularly our relationship with God, but we do our relationship with God as human beings together and a world together and a universe together. And how do we even, in the last, from a particularly Catholic perspective, in the last 60 years, actually deal with that theologically, ecclesially, and in a variety of ways. So it has certainly been an ongoing journey and a diverse journey in regard to that. Is that enough for
that's
now?
great.
Yep.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. A really rich answer. Terry, could I go to you now? Your response to the same question.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. David. For me, I guess the more pressing question to reflect on is not so much what does salvation mean in Christianity today, but what does Christianity mean for salvation today? And I guess I'm hoping I can tease that out in some way. Perhaps unlike David, having left a career as an ordained Uniting Church minister, but conscious now that I'm in amongst Catholic friends and I serve as a chaplain in a Catholic aged care facility. I hope that my offering doesn't disturb, but rather provokes. So my understanding of salvation clearly has changed over my lifetime. I would say philosophically, theologically, also as a progressive follower of Jesus. However, in terms of my embodied experience related to my childhood and adolescent experiences, which caused some degree of religious trauma, because in the Protestant tradition, salvation is in fact a big deal, and compounded by my own OCD personality, I haven't yet embodied this, but like David, I'm working on it. I remember at my first week of theological college, where I entered the college with a Sunday school faith, we were asked to write a 500-word essay on what we meant when we said the Bible is the Word of God. And with my Sunday school faith, I did what I thought was a very good treatise about that. But over the next months and years, the liberal college that I went to, which I'm very, very grateful for, deconstructed that conservative theological faith. And I become anxious, but also excited about the spaciousness, and had hoped that at the end of my college life, they would have reconstructed that faith. That didn't happen, but I'm enormously grateful for the journey of reflective practice that it set me out on. And so I approach this question, like all others, with some humility and accountability. If I had to characterize in a meme what my current view of salvation is, a shift from salvation as an upload to the iCloud to salvation as a download to the we cloud, from a personal to a collective, from an anthropomorphic to a universal, from a chronos future time to a kairos presence time. I see this really from the perspective of non-dualism. Marshall Davis, non-dual Christianity, said, sin is duality, non-duality is salvation, and forgiveness is non-dual awareness. So the progression that I've made, I guess, is from something done once and for all by one for the few to a dynamic energy field of interbeing, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's work, in which all things live and move and have their beings, as in Acts 17. In terms of the evolution of my thought, it would be from a linear, time-critical progression for Christian people, something done at the crucifixion, a doing outworking in the resurrection and Pentecost, a being modelled in baptism, and a becoming in Christian discipleship, a process in which we enter into a future heaven, to what I now see as more dynamic, present unfolding as divine oneness for everything, where we come to realise our interconnectedness, where we come to relinquish our separateness with the dying to self, become non-beings, and opened into the experience of interbeing. To this sense, I would say I have an atonement theory, a theory of at-one-ment. Indeed, even the progression I've outlined is still a binary dualistic construct. It's either or rather than both and. So for salvation, for me, can be both a done and a doing. And all of that is a very cumbersome way to say what Khalil Gibran expressed so eloquently in his poem Fear, where he expressed the fear experienced by a river as it contemplates flowing into the ocean. The closing stanza reads, "The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean."
Thanks, Terry. Some great food for thought there, and a wonderful meme, which I've never heard it expressed that way, so wonderful. Thank you. John, your reflections either on the paper or on what you've heard from Terry?
Yeah, I'm really pleased to be following Terry. I mean that was pretty good, Terry. Look, I think my understanding has obviously changed, and I think if I could just say two or three things. One is from the literal interpretation of the words to the symbolic. So going from Jesus died for our sins, being the literal interpretation of he saved us when he died on the cross, to a symbolic understanding of that term. And that saving being an ongoing process. So I think part of my change in understanding has been also as a result of a change in my concept of God. So I started out in life thinking God was, a person up in heaven, sitting next to his Father on a throne. And probably young Catholics and young Christians had that concept going on in their minds. But I've moved over a period of time to a concept of God as not a being, but as loving energy. And that loving energy flowing through not just human beings, but through animals and through plants and through the environment in all the ways that God influences the world. So I don't see salvation as a one-time thing that happened back in 30 AD when Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected. I see it as an ongoing thing. And I also, like I think Terry and Dave, see salvation as not an individual thing that God does with you, but as a collective thing. And I'm very conscious and have been for a long time of the fact that when God called the Jewish race through Abraham and Moses, he called the whole race. He didn't call individuals. He called everybody collectively as a race. And I think that for me flows through into my current understanding of my Christianity. I might hold it up there, Leanne.
Thanks, John. The second question the panel was asked to think about is, do you think that salvation is more about one's personal relationship with God or more about saving communities from their golden calf, however manifested? And each of the speakers tonight has spoken about the personal and the collective. So to me, this is what this question is sort of getting at is, the personal and collective. And maybe if you could unpack that a little for us, your thinking around the personal and the collective versus the collective. We heard about dualities. I imagine most of you don't see it as a duality, but so your reflections on the personal dimension, the communal dimension of salvation. Terry, could I start with you, and then I'll go to Dave and then to John. You're on mute. You're on mute, Terry.
Sorry about that. In a word, I was suggesting that salvation for me is about at-one-ment, in which all things live and move and have their being. There can be no enduring at-one-ment for me if I am not at one with myself, with others, with all of creation, or with the interbeing which we call God. Of what benefit is my salvation if everyone else around me is suffering? In the Charter for Compassion in Australia, we talk of the need for an understanding of our common humanity as a precursor to expression of compassion with the exercise of wisdom. Common humanity is the recognition that just like me, nobody wants to suffer, and just like me, everyone wants to be happy. That opens us to compassion and the expression of compassion, which is firstly the courage to enter into the human experience. It's the natural human inclination towards others and an action towards alleviating their suffering. In this reciprocity, we too are saved from our suffering. But the exercise of that compassion needs to be expressed in wisdom. with wisdom, which is the ability to discern, if you like, when to give someone a fish or to teach them how to fish, to give them a handout or a leg up. For me, salvation, therefore, is not a future hope someone does for us or that we earn for ourselves, what's been described as pie in the sky when you die. It is a present reality, something each of us are called to participate in for the sake of others. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." And so, like a pearl of great price, when we find it, we are willing to give up everything, even ourselves, in order to gain it. This forgiving, this willingness to sacrifice everything, indeed to die to self for the sake of others, powerfully portrayed in the Jesus of history on the cross, is our Via Dolorosa, a way of the cross for us, our death to life experience.
Thanks, Terry. Dave, your reflections?
From my perspective, and I think from a church's perspective, the only way we are human beings is together, and the only way we are human beings is on this earth. And if you like, in other people's terms, like made of stardust. So we belong to an extraordinary thing called creation, whatever that is. It would seem to me that the first act of salvation is creation. That you know, in theological terms, God creates and saves. That's the point of creation, is to give life to all that it exists, and to sustain that, nourish that. Now we've told stories for millennia about ourselves in terms of our relationship between the human and the divine, the human and the human, and all of that. In the midst of that, God offers God's very self into that as the salvific figure, and in a very personal way. And I suppose that's one of the keys for me theologically, is that this is a personal entity, and I, not literally, but created in the image and likeness of God. That interpersonal relationship that is the triune God, that we exist, giving expression to that, because that first act of creation is salvation. And Aquinas, and thank you, John, for pointing out Aquinas in your paper. Out from God and back to God. And it's that sort of movement that Aquinas talks about. Like, it's to create so that to be divine. And I still have no idea what eternity means, and can I get my mind, heart, and body or whatever around that. And we've got all sorts of symbols and things, but it's certainly not individualistic. It is about personal relationships, and personal relationships only exist on this earth, and I think in this creation, as together. We are persons in relationship, as John McMurray put it. And so that's how it is. And as persons in relationship, we only exist on an earth which is in relationship, which we need to care for and let it nourish as we nourish. So there is a reciprocity in the midst of all of that. And at core of that is God's will, if you like, for the uniqueness of every individual. And that's really important, I think. Like, there is a uniqueness about each and every individual, and that's important, but all in relationship with one another and all that exists.
Thanks, Dave. John?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I endorse many of the things that Terry and David have said, and particularly that creation, creation was the first Bible. Creation was the first act of salvation. I endorse that. I think part of where I come from is that we were taught that Jesus said there are basically two rules: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Um, so the as yourself is an important part of that, but essentially it's telling us that there's relationship with God and there's relationship with all our fellow human beings and creation generally. So in that sense, I think it's important to remember that uh, we are relational and we should look at salvation as relational. The other comment that I'd make is it's helpful to understand what's a golden calf.
Mm,
You know, what's a
mm.
golden calf for us at the moment? Is democracy a golden calf? Is is the system, the monetary system that we operate, is that a golden calf? And how do we bring the kingdom of God, which is among us, uh, to life in this political and social environment that we operate under? Um, so I think that's an important question, and I don't have the answer to that question, but I think we do have to um, encourage our governments to act in accordance with the Beatitudes. And certainly there are a lot of governments around the world at the moment that are not.
Dave?
I think we could probably include our ecclesial structures in golden calves as well.
Mm.
And how do we um, allow them to be reformed in the light of our understanding of salvation?
Provocative challenge to put out there, Dave, and certainly one as a female member of the church. I think there's a long, long way to go. And if I could make some sort of comment around that, we now have a new language around synodality. I'm yet to see that given expression in the way I think it's intended. But I'm facilitating, not being a commentator, so I should
But
curtail my
I
comments.
agree with you.
You're allowed to have an opinion, Leanne. It's okay.
The third question that the panel was asked to prepare for goes like this. The author writes, quote, "While the heart of the salvation message remains the same, God's desire to bring life and love to the world, its meaning has broadened to include personal, communal, and universal ecological dimensions. Do you agree with this statement? And what does this contemporary understanding demand of Christians today?" I think I've heard all of you say things which would agree with that statement. You can challenge me if you like. What I'm interested in, I think, you exploring is, and John, I'll ask you to start because you started touching on this.
Sure.
What does this understanding demand of Christians today at that general level? But then I'd also like you to take it to how are you making it manifest in your life? If you believe that change should be being made manifest, what does it look like in your life? So first, at that general level, what does it demand of Christians today? And secondly, bring it to the personal. Thanks,
Okay.
John.
So one of the observations that I'd make is that when it comes to looking at the priorities of people generally around the world, um, saving the planet runs a very poor second to what's in it for me. And you would probably observe if you're reading the papers that in many countries, cost of living is the most important issue, and that's completely understandable because if you understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs, getting fed and having a roof over your head is probably more important than other things. But I think the difficulty for us is that we are facing an existential crisis with the climate. Um, and Anyone who denies that, just needs to look at what's happening with some of the larger cyclones and the bigger fires and the worst droughts and floods that we're experiencing. So I think one of the issues for me is that Christians should be working on that whole issue of environment and loving the planet just as much as they love their families and their communities. In terms of what it means for me, I've stepped up in the last 2 years. I never used to write to the politicians, but I've stepped up in the last few years where I now write to my local members, both state and federal, about issues of concern. I don't do it often. It's probably, I might write once every month or 2 months on an issue. The most recent one I wrote on was the takeover of Santos. And I opposed the takeover of Santos by an overseas corporation because of the importance of energy for our community. So that's one of the ways in which I act. And of course, the other one is St Lucia's spirituality. That's taking up a fair bit of my time.
Thanks, John. If I go to Dave, so at that general level and then the more personal, and particularly given the context, as you told us at the beginning, your community is other priests. So it's a very sort of select, group. So I'm just interested at that general and then personally, how you embodying your change and understanding of salvation.
Yeah, and generally, I think in the wholeness, and it is about all the relationships in the world in which we have, and like war is just like, I have no words for that. The destructive nature of death that people bring about to each other. Like I listen to history podcasts, and I know this has been going on for a long time, but we have not learnt. And we're not learning to, in terms of John's, the desire to bring life and love to the world. As a Christian people, how do we do that? And we don't do that very well, and we haven't done it well, and sometimes we're still not doing it very well. And we could expand that to, in John's terms, to the planet. And the relationships. Like I look at the background in John, and I love that space, at Santa Teresa, and in all sorts of ways, shapes, and forms. And it's a symbol of the interconnectedness for me, from where he's sitting behind him to church, to creation and beyond, and the beauty of that does exist, and how do we actually enable that as a Christian people, day after day after day. I'll just let the ambulance go past. And yes, and from a personal level, I have 260 men who I am responsible for, in a sense, in the Archdiocese of Brisbane, from ordination to, the 93-year-old who, and in that mix now of those who are in active ministry, men who are born locally, men who are born overseas, the intercultural nature of that. How do I enable a formation in, if you like, in the terms we're talking about today around salvation, enable them to actually preach the gospel, to live the gospel in this space and this time. I'd like to crawl into the corner of my bedroom at times and go, I have no idea how to do that, because of that can be overwhelming. But that's the challenge. And I think that's the beauty of the challenge. It's not a new challenge. It's the challenge that Jesus faced, in a sense of how does he actually give expression to the life, to bring life and love to the world, how do we do that as ministers of the Word and ministers of, in our terms with the Eucharist, into this space, which includes all those relationships that God created from the very beginning to enable salvation. So it's nitty gritty. It's day by day. We had 2 men arrive from India on Thursday. It's everything from being hospitable to getting them a phone, create a bank account, to give them a safe space to live in, so that they feel comfortable to move into our space, and then enable them to minister into the people of into the world in which we live, so that they can give expression to that life and love of God, which they do elsewhere. So it's complex, but it's very much on the ground in a very particular way.
Thanks, Dave. And Terry?
Thank you. Well, if there's any question about my exegesis, the hermeneutic is really what I'm kind of interested in here. So I certainly agree that there are demands not only on Christians but on all people to undergo a transformation of thought and practice so that we can develop this ethic and this practice. Ken Wilber would call the inner work growing up, waking up, and cleaning up. Growing up is the process of psychological and emotional maturity we need to undergo, both personally and culturally. Waking up is the spiritual experience which overcomes our experience of the self as separate from being in general. And cleaning up is the ongoing work which involves putting boundaries to our natural egocentricity, which constantly wants to construct the illusion of our separateness, with the goal not being our personal perfection, but our surrender in love, our forgiveness, and union to God's salvific activity on the planet. That's the inner work. Then comes the outer work, which Mark Gaffney calls showing up. With the polycrisis of our time, there's no shortage of opportunities to become involved in salvific work, whether it's the pain of healing the planet, its people, its politics, or a program. We live in a world of outrageous pain, Mark Gaffney says, and the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. That's the vision and call of the Charter for Compassion 2.0. It's a framework for compassionate action, a global movement for planetary transformation, and a call to co-create a world that works for everyone and everything. So there are many opportunities and how to pick one. Mark Gaffney talks of our unique self. I think this is what David was coming to a moment ago. The irreducibility and unique expression of the love, intelligence, and love beauty that initiated and animates all that is, that lives in you, as you, and through you. Ultimately, he says, your unique self is God having a you experience. So really waking up to your unique self, growing up into your unique self, and showing up as your unique self is a transformation that can shift everything. It's a change that can change everything. And so one of the things that I throw my weight behind at the moment is the work of the Charter for Compassion in Australia, and the words of the Charter and its pillars to facilitate transformation give me plenty of opportunities to participate. On a day-to-day basis, my work has been in pastoral and spiritual care, in aged care, and at the end of life. And I'm very passionate about the work that I do with an aging community, honouring the preciousness of life, sharing the stories, and gleaning whatever wisdom we can for future generations.
Thanks very much, Terry. That's quite nicely brought us to the time we had allocated initially for the panel. Robert, are there?
Leanne, I'm going to remove the spotlights.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Just letting you know.
Robert, I can't see anything in the chat. Is there anything in the chat that I'm not seeing?
No, there isn't.
Okay, so we won't address any questions there. I do have a final question I'll put to the panel, but before I do that, just an opportunity. You may not have put something in the chat, but there's something you would like to ask the panel. So if you'd put either wave at me or put the little virtual hand up. Gabriella, thank you. You just need to come off mute, Gabriella.
Yes. Oh, hi. Now, what I was wondering, how do you see the role of prayer? Prayer committed, deep, connected prayer, individually, for the community, for the cosmos, as a way to bring about transformation and change, to let God in more and more at all these levels.
Thanks, Gabriella. Terry, would you like to respond initially to that? Then I'll invite Dave and then John. You're on mute, Terry, by the way.
It's also because I'm thinking. I love children's books, and one of my favorites children's books is called Granddad's Prayers of the Earth. And it talks about all the different ways we can pray, sometimes even using words. So it talks about the ways that the rocks and the trees and the water praise, and how music is a prayer. In Sunday school, we used to teach children that you could shoot up an arrow prayer to God, which could be, help, I'm scared. So I think I understand prayer now as a posture of silence and openness in which I'm trying to connect with God's activity in the world. And I often find that the words get in the way. But I'm a great believer in getting out of the way so that God's Spirit can do what God wants to do in and through us.
Thanks, Terry. Dave?
One of the first things I think about prayer for me is that anyone prays comes from generally an act of humility, that we know who we are before God, particularly, and that we are in need. Secondly, I should do more of it. Because it's about a reliance at times, not on we can rely too much on ourselves. And I listen to a podcast every morning which finishes its prayer by, Jesus, we trust in you. And I think that's absolutely key. Like, I'm not going to save the world. I'm not going to save anybody else. But I want to engage in God's way of salvation, which is creative, which is life-giving, which is loving. And how do I actually enable myself to actually get into that? As a leader of prayer, as well, how do I enable people through how I am at prayer in a community sense, enabling other people to actually do that as well. So I've got to be very open to how I am a prayer as a leader in that space. And I think that's really important to enable others into that space.
Thanks, Dave. And John?
Thanks for your question, Gabriella. I think it's really important to have a regular spiritual practice that you do daily. And that could be as simple as saying hello in the morning and saying goodbye at night. I use the Jesuit Examen at night to just have a look at, well, how did the day go? Was it a good day? Was it a bad day? Did I get angry with anyone? Did I do things that I shouldn't have done, or omit to do things that I shouldn't have done? So having a regular practice that you use daily would be what I'd say.
Thank you. And thanks, Gabriella, for the question.
Thank you.
Opportunity for one further question.
Or comment.
Or comment. Well, I might ask my final one, and that's to ask the panel, so this is a question without notice. Given that there are, I mean, obviously the three of you have thought very deeply about this and have expressed your movement over time, but there are people who would still, just to go from John's paper, they hear and they would believe Jesus died for our sins, so that more traditional view of salvation. What would be one suggestion you could make to engage with someone that's their concept of salvation, to help invite them to a more expansive view? So that'll be the final question. So how can you help break open a conversation with someone who, to invite them to a more expansive view? I'll go to John first and then Terry and then Dave give you the final word. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so just a brief
That's an interesting question. I'd be inclined to encourage the person to read the Gospel of John with a commentary, and to do that over a period of time, because the Gospel of John is more mystic than the other three Gospels, and is likely to expand their view of the world.
Thanks, John. Terry, just a minute or so.
It's a good question, Leanne. And it's really topical, isn't it? Because often we live in a very polarized kind of world. So whether it's a different perspectives as Christian people or whatever the situation may be, for me, I think it's about firstly investing in the relationship and being present with the other and holding up, I guess, in the way we live and the way we think, a different perspective. It's kind of invitational, but, often that's really difficult. I try and imagine speaking to my younger self with the progression I've made, and I reckon it's taken 66 years or more to get here, and I don't know that there are any shortcuts.
Thanks, Terry. And
So
Dave?
it might simply be a timing thing.
I've been a teacher most of my priesthood, and I love it when enabling people to ask questions. So following John, rather than reading John's gospel, I'd get them to read Acts of the Apostles. Why did these people do this? Why did they respond in this way to this death and experience of the resurrection? That's why I could think of read all the Gospels, and see the difference, that sort of thing. But maybe Acts would be the thing. Like, what's in there that enabled these people to actually go and give and take this with them into the world? Because I think that's what we're called to do. It's to actually take this into the world in a whole new and different way in our time. And that gives us a model for that.
Thank you. And I think it's particularly challenging in this instance with take it into the world when you're talking to someone who believes it's something that's done to them. So that it's getting that acknowledgement of responsibility and shared responsibility. Thank you. So we've moved now to the time of reflection. This is individual personal reflection. We just have 3 minutes. So it's a time for you to reflect, pray, journal, whatever works best for you. Thinking of the questions, what was new, different, challenging? What is God saying to you? And what questions do you want to pursue or do more research on following our gathering tonight? So I just invite you to reflect, pray, journal, and I'll call you back in 3 minutes. Thank you, everyone. If I just call you back again. So hopefully our discussion tonight has given you some interesting perspectives on salvation and its role in a spiritual journey. We'll be aiming at posting the video of this conversation on our website, which will give you another opportunity to reflect upon its contents. And I think you would, as I did, found it a really rich and deep conversation and one that certainly would warrant revisiting. A special thank you to John for his preparation of the paper and also for his contribution as a panellist. So thank you very much, John. Thanks also particularly to Father Dave and to Terry. As you can tell, people, our panellists have given considerable thought to the paper and to their responses, and we really appreciate the thought and time that you've given in preparation, but also in joining us tonight. Could I also acknowledge Robin? She wasn't with us, but I'm sure she would have put time and thought into preparation. It's unfortunate she wasn't able to share those reflections with her, but in her absence, I'd just like to acknowledge her willingness to contribute to the discussion. Thank you also to those who are spreading the word about St Lucia's spirituality. It's certainly comforting to know from feedback that our work has relevance for so many people. The next meeting is on the 3rd of March, where there'll be an examination of the main themes from Dermot O'Murtugh's book, Divine Radiance in Human Evolution. O'Murtugh is an anthropologist with deep insight and a long-term perspective, and he regularly challenges customary thinking. So we hope you can join us for a discussion on this short but interesting book. If you're with us for the first time tonight, I would encourage you to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. It's free, which you can do at the bottom of the homepage on the website. So that concludes our formal meeting. I hope you all have a wonderful week. As usual, the meeting will remain open for a further 15 minutes for those who would like to continue. Unfortunately, I've got another commitment, so I will actually be departing when we conclude. So thank you, everyone, and I will hand over to John, who will just be present for the next 15 minutes. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.
Thanks very much to you too,
Thanks,
Leanne,
Leanne.
Thanks, Leanne.
for your facilitation. I'm going to cease the recording now.